You know that burn? That deep shaking exhaustion when you're fighting for that one last rep or sprinting those last few meters? Your brain is yelling go, but your muscles just won't cooperate? For decades, we've been told a simple story. It's all because lactic acid is flooding your muscles. I'm Dr. Jake, and that's what I learned as a graduate student in the 80s and passed on as a professor of exercise physiology. But there's just one problem. That story turned out to be a fabrication. What's actually happening when you hit the wall is far more complex and way more interesting. Muscle fatigue isn't caused by one villain. It's a cascade of events: energy turnover, calcium mismanagement, and alterations in nervous activity. It's not due to a single factor. It's a collective action slowdown, like an NBA team tanking for a higher draft. I see you, Utah Jazz. But once you understand it, you can train smarter to minimize it. The idea that lactic acid causes muscle fatigue has been around for over a century. Early researchers noted that exhausted animal muscles contain high lactate levels. The assumption seemed logical. High lactate equals fatigue. Early frog experiments reinforced this idea. When they stimulated their muscles repeatedly, they stopped contracting and lactate accumulates. Case closed, or so we thought. The traditional explanation went like this. Since lactate rises as pH levels fall, it was long blamed for lactic acid buildup, increased acidity, impaired contraction, and that burning sensation. But modern research dismantled that explanation, better than MacGruber dismantling a nuclear missile. First, even when the pH drops in human muscles during exercise, we don't accumulate lactic acid. We do accumulate lactate and hydrogen ions. The hydrogen ions lower the pH and increase acidity, but lactate itself does not. In fact, lactate's not a metabolic waste product, it's a usable fuel. Let me explain. When glycolysis runs fast to make ATP quickly, pyruvate is converted into lactate. That conversion helps generate NAD, allowing glycolysis to continue producing ATP rapidly. Lactate can then be shuttled to neighboring muscles, the heart, and the brain to be used as energy. Or it can be transported to the liver where it's converted back to glucose. So in reality, lactate's an energy shuttle, not a toxin. Now, what about the burn? During intense exercise, hydrogen ions do increase, the majority of which comes from the breakdown of ATP, among other sources. Their buildup can contribute to reduced contractile function and that burning. We now know that acidosis plays a smaller role in fatigue than previously believed. As for lactate accumulation, it may actually help buffer some of the acid. So lactate is present during fatigue, but it's more of a bystander, sometimes even a helper, not the primary cause of muscle force failure. This is a classic example of how an association, in this case high lactate and muscle fatigue, did not prove causation. Like just because a guy walks in a Bath and Body Works doesn't mean he loves strawberry shortcake candles. He may just be conducting important field research on delicious scents that calm and relax. To better understand fatigue, here's an important sequence of events leading up to muscle contraction. Your brain sends an electrical signal down a motor neuron. The nerve releases acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction. The muscle fiber generates an action potential. That travels down the T-tubules. Then the sarcoplasmic reticulum releases calcium. The calcium binds to a special protein called troponin. This allows other proteins, actin and myosin, to interact. Lastly, ATP powers myosin to slide actin, developing the force for muscle contraction. And that force production relies heavily on adequate calcium release, functional cross-bridge cycling or actin and myosin interaction, stable sodium and potassium gradients at the nerve and muscle, and continuous ATP turnover or supply. Fatigue occurs when one or several of these processes become compromised. And what are the most likely possibilities? Moving beyond lactic acid, modern research points to several key fatigue-causing mechanisms inside the muscle. The first is inorganic phosphate accumulation. During high-intensity contractions, phosphate accumulates rapidly. Every time ATP is broken down, an inorganic phosphate is released. And no, it doesn't cause fatigue because it's not organic. In chemistry, inorganic means it's just not bound to carbon. And remember, organic on a label doesn't automatically mean healthier. It mostly just means more expensive. It's true. Rather, inorganic phosphate causes fatigue by reducing calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It can also enter the sarcoplasmic reticulum, forming calcium phosphate complexes. But wait, there's more. If you order high levels of inorganic phosphate now, you'll also get a decreased myofibular sensitivity to calcium, along with an interference of cross-bridge force production. This is one of the strongest mechanistic explanations for rapid force decline during intense exercise. In short, phosphate accumulation interferes with calcium doing its job during muscle contraction. contraction. And that means a drop in muscle force, which is the definition of fatigue, not a complete inability of the muscle to contract. Next, ion balance. With repeated contractions, sodium enters the cell while potassium exits. If extracellular potassium rises significantly, membrane excitability declines. That makes action potentials less effective at triggering calcium release. In other words, even though the brain sends a signal, the muscles just can't fully respond. That brings us to calcium handling impairment. When you contract a muscle over and over, especially at high intensity, that calcium system starts to become sluggish. With fatigue, the muscle may release less calcium with each signal, and it may also take longer to pump the calcium back into storage so it's ready for the next contraction. This means less calcium is available to activate those force-producing contractile proteins. The muscle still contracts, just not as powerfully as a few reps ago or a few meters ago. And finally, muscle fiber type's also a factor. Fast-twitch fibers produce more force and power, but they fatigue quickly. Slow-twitch fibers produce less force, but they're much more resistant to fatigue. As high-force, high-twitch fibers begin to fatigue, the nervous system can increase activation to slow-twitch fibers to help maintain force. The problem? Slow-twitch fibers don't have the same maximal force capacity. That decline in maximal force, not a complete shutdown, is fatigue in action. Fatigue is not just local inside the muscle, it's also neural. As exercise continues, sensory neurons detect the amount of metabolite accumulation, temperature rise, and mechanical strain. If the signal's too great, in response, the nervous system can shut down the motor drive to the muscles. The odd thing is, this isn't a weakness, it's protection. Your brain won't allow ATP depletion during exercise. Doing so will cause structural damage, even rigor to the muscles. And you don't want to end up as stiff as a roadkill raccoon. To protect the muscles, the brain reduces neural drive before catastrophic failure occurs. This is called central fatigue, which acts like a building governor, preventing severe injury. This helps explain why sometimes you feel like you can't push any harder, even if the muscle isn't completely empty. Now, the cause of fatigue depends on the activity. Fatigue in a 100-meter sprint is not the same as fatigue in a marathon. During high-intensity, short-duration exercise, fatigue is most likely due to phosphate accumulation, calcium handling impairment, and/or ion imbalance. However, during endurance exercise, fatigue comes from things like glycogen depletion, rising core temperature, dehydration, increased perceived effort, and/or central fatigue. Different exercises rely on different energy systems and on different fiber types. So, what can you do to better resist fatigue? Yes, through training and a few supplements, which I'll cover in my next two videos. Training adaptations improve mitochondrial density and improve oxidation capacity, which increases your ability to generate ATP aerobically. Why does that matter for fatigue? Because greater ATP production enhances lactate transport and utilization, improves buffering capacity, provides more efficient motor unit recruitment, better glycogen storage, and improves sodium-potassium pump function. Training also improves capillary density, sodium-potassium pump efficiency, and motor unit coordination. Obviously, training doesn't eliminate fatigue, it shifts the threshold, allowing you to train harder and perform better before fatigue sets in. So the next time you hit that wall, you'll know it's not lactic acid poisoning, it's either inorganic phosphate accumulation, reduced calcium availability, altered membrane excitability, and some cross-bridge interference. And fatigue isn't a flaw, it's an integrated protective response. It signals the limit of your current system. And with intelligent training and nutrition, that limit moves. And that's the real truth about muscle fatigue. So the next time you hear a commentator attribute fatigue to lactic acid, feel free to roll your eyes along with me. Thanks for watching. And as always, my answers come from peer-reviewed research.